This week, we're going to be talking about surveying. Let's start with getting some terminology straight. To survey is to actually hand out questionnaires. The piece of paper or the online repository that you send out a link to is not a survey. Surveying is what you're doing. What people actually are going to fill out for you, be it online or in pencil and paper, that is called the questionnaire. We often misuse these terms and say that survey is the thing that our respondents are filling out, when in fact, they're filling out a questionnaire because you are surveying them. Questionnaires can include 3 types of questions. The first is closed-ended. These are questions in which you give your respondents particular categorical options for answers. For example, what is your class? Are you freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior? Next, you have open-ended questions. These are questions in which respondents are not limited to their answer. For example, what advice would you give your professor for improving the class next semester? Last, we have scale items. Like closed-ended items, with a scale item, you, the researcher, are going to provide the response options to your participant. However, these are not categorical. These are typically numerical or easy conversion to numerical answers that have equidistance apart or the ability for there to be a 0. In the measures lecture, we reviewed the types of scale items. There's the thermometer ladder scale, the semantic differential, and the Likert type item. How do you administer a questionnaire? Without a doubt, the most difficult part of completing a survey as a researcher is getting people to participate in your study. You have 4 options. The first is to use the mail. Mail is one of the most effective ways to get responses in terms of quickly collecting data, but it's also the most expensive. Respondents are not likely to return a questionnaire that you've simply sent them with no prepaid return envelope or incentive. However, if you mail out a questionnaire, include an envelope that's already addressed back to you with a stamp, and put a small incentive in the mail, such as $1, then you usually have a pretty high response rate. But again, that gets expensive. Next, you have group administration. Group administration takes place when the researcher convinces groups of people to come to them. The nice thing about group administration is that you can control the environment your participants are taking the questionnaire in. You can make sure the room's not too hot, not too cold. You can make sure there's not a lot of noise outside. The better your participants are concentrating on the questionnaire, the better your data will be. With mail, you're not going to be able to control their environment. With group, you're going to have a much harder time convincing people to come to you. So there are pros and cons to each of these types of administration. Next is telephone. Telephone administration means you pull out a phone book and you systematically sample telephone numbers to call people and ask them questions one at a time. Then you, the researcher, would write down all of their responses. Telephone, because people are usually concentrating just on talking to you, is a fairly well-controlled environment. However, you have very limited sampling options here. Few people have a listed telephone number. The demographics for that is at quite age, so unless you're engaging in a study where you need an older demographic, telephone is going to result in a lot of sampling error. Last, we have the internet. Internet administration of questionnaires is the most popular way to survey respondents now. But it's also the one in which you have least control. I'm sure you filled out a questionnaire online before. What were you doing? Were you paying attention to the questionnaire you were completing and that alone? Or did you have Netflix streaming in the background as you ate your lunch and did this with 1/10 or 20% of your concentration? Because there are so many potential distractions associated with internet administration, you need a higher number of participants for this type than the other 3, simply to account for the measurement error you're likely to see because of respondents not paying attention to what they're doing. Now, here are a few design tips to keep in mind anytime that you build a questionnaire. The first is to remember to start with your informed consent. This isn't just a suggestion, this is the law. If you have not completed your city certification yet, please do so before attempting the questionnaire assignment. Also, help respondents keep track of items. When you're filling out a questionnaire, it's really easy to lose your place. To, for example, put the answer to item 1 in the row for item 2, or to skip item 3 altogether. If you visually design your questionnaire in such a way that respondents have different colors associated with different rows, it minimizes the chances that they misanswer or that they skip an item. Next, give your respondents options other than blanks as often as possible. Here's a classic example of what not to do. Now, of course, we don't want to limit people to what their biological sex is. However, if you ask someone a question about biological sex and then just give them a blank to put in whatever they want, somebody who thinks they are clever and original is going to give you completely useless data. Instead, you want to limit their options as much as possible. There's nothing wrong with giving an other and a blank at the end of any closed-ended items, but you want to make it clear that you're not giving an opportunity for them to ruin your data set. If you do need to give just an open-ended answer, please make sure you make a note in instructions that respondents should not use abbreviations. For example, if I am surveying college students and I ask what your major is, and I don't include the instructions that you cannot abbreviate, I'm going to get all sorts of majors that make no sense to me. PR, sure, I probably get that's public relations, but EES, EME, EES, those are options that I've seen several times on major codes, and I still don't know what they are. I have a pretty good guess, but I can't actually use that data because I don't know what it is. Next, consider your target demographic when requesting age. Age is a place where we typically get a lot of bad data. If you're dealing with young children, the word age doesn't mean a lot to them yet. So if you're talking about a demographic that is under 7 years old, you probably want to ask them, how old are you, for them to fully understand what you're asking. If you're surveying an adult sample, you can probably get away with age in a blank, unless you think you're dealing with a population that is likely to lie to you. You actually put yourself at risk when you're dealing with a population over the age of 40, that some participants are instead going to respond to you with the age they wish they were, rather than the age they actually are. If you're dealing with a population between the ages of 40 and 60, instead I recommend that you ask, in what year were you born? While it's very easy to lie about your age, it takes a lot more work to figure out what year you would have had to have been born to actually be the age you wish you were today, and most people aren't going to go through the trouble to do that math. Next, leave your demographic items to the end. As you've seen, it takes some thought to respond to a social measure. Because of this, the further respondents get in their questionnaire, the more psychologically fatigued they're going to get. Therefore, you want to leave the items to the end of the questionnaire that require the least amount of thought. This is why the demographics always go at the very end of a well-designed questionnaire. Last, be sure to give a set of new instructions for every measure or section. This includes every measure you give and the demographic section. Here's the perceived immediacy measure again. Note at the beginning of this measure, there are instructions. The following is a list of words that may describe your instructor. Please click on the line to indicate how you would describe your supply chain instructor. If this measure is presented to you in the middle of a questionnaire that is all about your supply chain instructor, surely you could have figured out what to do without the set of instructions. However, having that set of instructions indicates to respondents that we're shifting gear. Now we're going to be asking you about something other than you were just thinking about in the last measure, so clear your head a bit. Having those instructions in between each set of measures and items improves the quality of your data. So here are your tips for designing a questionnaire and administering surveys. If you have any problems or questions, let me know.